Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is an ASUS Republic of Gamers Striker graphics card. The black and red styling, aluminium backplate and direct CU2 cooler are all indicators that this was once a high-end product, except it wasn't. The ROG Striker underneath the custom cooler and striking design is a GTX 760. Granted, it's a factory overclocked 4GB version of a 760 that would have set you back 20% more than a standard card in 2014, but it is still a 760. So what did you get apart from the aforementioned if you bought one of these high-end looking mid-range cards 6 years ago? Well, there's the dust-proof Cooltech fan design, which provides multi-directional and efficient airflow, upgraded power delivery components, and last but not least, the colour-coded load indicator. All of that makes for a pretty standout card even today. I mean, it looks fantastic design-wise, but perhaps its biggest saving grace in 2020 will be the 4 gigs of VRAM. This may help greatly in modern titles and could mean the difference between playable and unplayable frame rates. I guess we should find out just how well it does these days. First things first, and I've thrown the GPU clock speed up amongst the results. This card is advertised with an 1150 MHz boost clock, but I found that it actually hits up to 1189 in pretty much all instances. The temperature often got up towards 80 degrees as well, and as with all older cards, a new helping of thermal paste is ideal before use because you don't know how the card has been used or for how long in someone else's system. So all of the games were tested at 1080p today, which admittedly may have been a little too much for this card, though the extra VRAM should help keep those frame rates above 30 FPS in scenarios where the 2GB standard card might struggle. Crysis Remastered looks fantastic and plays fairly well in terms of the average frame rate, but the 1 and 0.1% lows were quite bad. This happens with a lot of hardware anyway when I test this title, and overall it doesn't feel too bad to actually play. Red Dead Redemption 2 is always unpredictable in terms of performance. Sometimes the hardware that you think will do bad actually does quite well, and vice versa. Here we weren't quite able to hit 30 FPS on average at 1080p, but having played through this title on PlayStation 4, 27 FPS doesn't feel too bad to me at all. First person mode does feel more choppy though, and I'd recommend sticking to third person. Because of the VRAM, I could even use the high textures, which doesn't really impact performance all that much over low textures, but it does look a lot better. Everything else here was on low, and TAA was turned on, just to avoid some of those horrible jagged edges. I should also mention that the medium settings produced the same result even when the textures were on medium as well. This is one of those games that still looks really good no matter how low you go in terms of settings. That being said, there are of course a couple of exceptions to this rule. Running at half of 720p, for example, would be one of them. Towns like Valentine and cities like Saint Denis would also have a larger impact on the frame rate, which isn't ideal as a lot of missions do take place in those busier zones. With Horizon Zero Dawn, I was noticing a few flickering textures, which I believe has something to do with one of the in-game settings, as I've seen this with a couple of different graphics cards. The performance was however okay with the lowest preset, and to be honest, the original settings didn't prove much more intensive. Like with all tested games, a lower resolution would be the best bet, and just look at the VRAM usage here. The card is hitting the 4GB limit, so I imagine that there would be some differences in performance with the standard 2GB card. This may be a good example of a game that demonstrates the big difference between 2 and 4 gigs. On the other hand, the difference may still be minimal, considering the card is still topping out power-wise. Expect a drop to the mid-20s as the action starts to heat up. The footage from Rainbow Six Siege here was taken from a Lone Wolf gameplay test, but the figures were taken from the built-in benchmark. The ASUS ROG Striker has no problem with maintaining plus 100 FPS here, even if we did have to use the low settings. The resolution scale was however at 100%, so this was full-fat 1080p. In terms of a processor that I actually recommend if you want to use the 760 in 2020, then I'd say a modern day i3 would be the highest. Even the 4-core 4-threaded 9100F would do, and in fact it would probably be held back by this GPU. Back to the gameplay results, and Rainbow Six is probably the best FPS result you're going to see today, especially when I'm about to play a bit of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, choosing a busy airport in the middle of London or New York would absolutely destroy frame rates, but opting to take off from a quiet coastal runway like Manston here means that 30 FPS is more than achievable. Once again, the VRAM usage is exceeding 2GB, 3GB in fact, so this card is probably producing slightly better frame rates than a 2GB 760. That said, you are going to be limited to low settings if you choose to play in Full HD, but luckily this game still plays quite well. 30 FPS is honestly a blessing when it comes to this title because there are a lot of older GPUs that would struggle to hit that. The 4GB Striker still does okay. It was very cool when it came out, and to be honest it's still a pretty cool looking card in 2020, especially in a world full of pretty plain hardware designs. Would I recommend buying one in 2020? Well, if you are going to get a 760, whether it's a Striker or not, I would certainly recommend trying to find a 4GB version over the 2GB version. However, when you start looking at 4GB cards, you might find that they're more expensive than, say, a better option. For example, you could probably pick up a 4GB 960 for a similar price than you could in some places as a 4GB 760, simply because the 760s are a little bit harder to find, but it all depends on where you live and how much, of course, used graphics cards are priced. So just as I finished editing this video, the beta version of Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War finished downloading, so I jumped into a quick multiplayer game. I believe this map is called Satellite, something along those lines. The game's pretty fun, as Call of Duty Online always is, and performance here at 1080p with the low settings wasn't too bad. We were averaging around 40 frames per second, so the experience is okay. There will be some slowdown online, which is never a good thing, but it's better than I thought anyway in terms of the frame rates. As you can tell though from that footage, I have not improved over Warzone, but yeah, tomorrow we'll probably be testing this, perhaps with a couple of lower end graphics cards, maybe the 750 Ti as well. I've had another one of those arrive, so it'll be interesting to see what that can do in this title. The 760 is of course slightly faster, and this 4GB version should be even faster than the standard 2GB one, but as for this video, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you still have a GTX 760 in your system, whether it's the 4GB or the 2GB version, and how well it performs for you. Do you still use it? Are you getting on with it? And if you're planning on upgrading, what are you going to upgrade to? Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.